Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to the Bergamo Scienza Festival event. My name is Attilio Brambilla, and today I represent the Alfaparf group. This is a Bergamo multinational company working in the field of beauty cosmetics, and we have been collaborating with Bergamo Scienza Festival for the past few years. There is also the Alfaparf Foundation that was recently established, and its mission is to be close to younger generations in the field of science dissemination. So Bergamo Scienza Festival is definitely the best festival that we could sponsor. We decided to strengthen our presence. We are the Bergamo Scienza Festival sponsor to state that we do share young people's situations and moods. Young people are often living on social networks, so their reality is very much virtual. Today, we decided to be present as a sponsor of this event because we believe it is extremely interesting through Professor Rosenfeld. We can deal with a topic that has becoming ever present in our life. And through the scientific lens, so from a different perspective in this case, we can be educated in something so that we can better understand what our moods are, what our feelings are. So I believe that to educate ourselves in this field is key. Now I leave the floor to the speakers. Enjoy the presentation and long life to Bergamo Scienza Festival.
Buon pomeriggio.
Good afternoon. My name is Francesca, and member of We Science, the youth group for Bergamo Scienza Festival. Before starting, I'd like to have your attention reminding you that connecting to bergamoscienza.it site and clicking on the button live, you can follow the event in streaming or through the YouTube channel and through the Facebook page. Both channels, you can send questions to speakers or invite your followers and friends to follow the conference live. Questions will be sorted by volunteers, and they will be asked during the question and answer session. The 22nd edition of Bergamo Scienza Festival conferences are made accessible to disabled people, trying to guarantee places without architectural barriers, and also through the sign language translation. These are also available to deaf people. Conferences with foreign guests will be simultaneously translated. Recordings will be published on our official sites at the end of the festival. These services were made available thanks to the Banca Popolare di Bergamo Foundation that through Bergamo Scienza promote inclusion and accessibility. For simultaneous translation, you can scan the QR code that the volunteers can provide you with, or can you find behind my shoulders. The QR code will directly address you to the Converso web app, where you can select interpretation language from the drop-down menu. To listen to the translation, you need earphones. You can use your own. If you don't have one, you can ask volunteers in the room. I would like to welcome to today's event, whose title is Bonobo Sisterhood, a new model of female solidarity. Diane Rosenfeld is our speaker, together with Mrs. Romeo from the University Bocconi. The moderator is Mr. Martini. Rachele Paolucci will make the closing remarks. She's from the Association of Multiple Sclerosis in Italy. You're invited to mute your cellular phones and attend our conferences. Enjoy the event. Thank you very much. Welcome to you all. I'm very happy to see very many people attending this conference. This is a very special conference to me. It is going to be very challenging, very compelling. This is a topic we are all concerned about. We should confront ourselves with this subject, also taking inspiration from the work that has been carried out by colleagues, thus providing us with a 360-degree perspective that can help us develop a critical thinking approach to these subjects. It is a great pleasure for us to have here with us Diane Rosenfeld. We'll be hearing from her the main speech. Also Graziella Romeo, a law professor at Università Bocconi. She will be introducing the conference, and she will be supporting us during the question and answer session. And Rachele Michelacci, who is a member of the Italian Association of Multiple Sclerosis, and she's part of a network of women who have been dealing with the discrimination of disabled women, in particular women affected by multiple sclerosis. And I would say that this topic is even more serious than the one we will be tackling later. Without any further ado, I would like to ask Professor Romeo to introduce our main speaker and the conference theme. Thank you very much, Graziella, for being with us. Allow me to thank Professor Martino and Bergamo Scienza Festival organizers. When I was invited to introduce Professor Rosenfeld's work, I thought about how I could do this, because I've been collaborating with her for many years now, and when you work together for such a long time, you share ideas. So very many of the things Professor Rosenfeld wrote in the book she published recently are things that I shared while she was working on these ideas. And this also impacted my teaching at Bocconi University, and also impacted the way in which I look at this problem. So I tried to think how to cover Professor Rosenfeld's work, considering the implied assumptions of many of her theories. And I do believe that there are three concepts that cover Professor Rosenfeld's work, and these three concepts I will rely upon to introduce her work, so that you can all actively participate in our discussion. The first concept is genealogy. The second is imagination. The third concept is the one which is dearest to me, given that I am a scientist. It is politics, how politics has to do with this theme. Professor Rosenfeld comes from the legal feminism discipline in the United States, and this was the discipline that first understood that we can deal with women's rights, and it is meaningful to discuss feminism only if you are open to question institutions, only if feminism has then impact on the political structures of any country. There are plenty of assumptions underlying such reasoning. The very first concept that we should keep in mind is the concept of genealogy. Why so? Because Diane Rosenfeld puts forth a model of social relationships that structure the political coexistence and that is based on solidarity. So I do believe that this has to do with the idea that women in their behaviors, in the decisions they make in their private sphere, which is still always very political, build a sort of genealogy. So they build relationships, even kinship relationships, even when there is no actual kinship. And these relations have to do with the transfer of knowledge, of value systems, of moral codes that suggest to behave in a manner instead of another, to get rid of patriarchal structures and frameworks, to develop a moral code that is against patriarchy. What is a moral code against the concept of patriarchal societies? I believe that Professor Rosenfeld's work is telling us that it is against the patriarchal society what is plural, what welcomes diversity, the complexity of human beings as a way to enrichment, as a tool of enrichment. This means that to fight patriarchal society means to be pluralistic, means to be open to diversity, to complexity, and it also means that the endeavor entailed by the construction of an anti-patriarchal society system is the result of imagination. Imagination creates symbols, storytelling, myths, and as human beings living in communities, sharing cultures, we are rich in imagination, and this is also part of our heritage, of our legacy. Such an imagination, collective imagination, we have to reconsider, we have to discuss anew. Timothy Radcliffe is an Irish Benedictine monk that teaches in Oxford, at Oxford University. And when speaking about gender violence, one doesn't immediately think of him, but he wrote a very beautiful book, which is called To Love in Freedom. So he writes, when we reconsider gender relationships and gender violence, we should be more practical. We should be down to earth. This means to deal with reality. And I believe this is the most significant teaching of gender studies and women's studies. We must interact with reality, and reality is more complicated than we were told. As you'll hear, Professor Rosenfeld uses or relies on studies that were carried out in the animal kingdom. Here you see how imagination is important, because you have to look at paradigms you are not used to, and also there is a knowledge contamination. You must stop thinking that there are patterns that are models that we inherit and replicate, because such patterns can be reconsidered based on different codes. But to do so, we must come down to earth. We must stop thinking that there is a way of being man or being woman or being a couple. There are various ways of being that we do not know, and the invitation addressed to us is to try and imagine all these different ways. Imagination here is not used to dream of something, but to generate political realities. And here I come to the third concept of politics. You might say that to create reality, imagining them, is not rational. The opposite is true, in my opinion, because the fact that imagination can come to construct a political system is very modern, because this is exactly what constitutional law does, because constitutional laws present models of societies that they aim at realizing. They develop ideas that must be turned into actions, and these actions then must build a reality. So imagination can build reality. And this is one thing that I learned collaborating with Professor Rosenfeld, because when the year before publishing the book, she told me we should be thinking of how to structure the Bonobo sisterhood. And I remember that after one lecture, we had a coffee at the university bar. There were students with us, and we made a list of things to be done, starting from our imagination. And then there was also a list of actions, of deliverables. I believe that the world of the Bonobo sisterhood can be construed in such a manner, and the structure of solidarity, bonds in private life, contributing to social coexisting, can also create a political community that is more aware, more knowledgeable, that can collaborate in such a manner. Private collaboration turns into a political message. I do believe that if in our social life, in our private life, we are taught to find compromises, to mutually help ourselves. So we cannot accept political structures based on oppression. There is a connection between what is private and what is political that is kept together by the awareness of living together, of being together. And this is the deep meaning of this imaginative effort Professor Rosenfeld invites us to make. And now I leave the floor to her. Thank you very much.
Grazie. Grazie molte, Graziella. Un'introduzione, devo dire.
Thank you very much, Graziella, for your introduction. I cannot think of any better way. Now it's Diane's turn, please.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I'm so honored that you all came to share your Sunday afternoon with us today to talk about the Bonobo sisterhood. And I'm deeply grateful for the invitation to speak at this wonderful conference. that came through in a bonobo sisterhood kind of way, because my student from Bocconi, Francesca Martino, shared the book with her wonderful father and her wonderful mother.
Thank you very much.
And Gian Vito and Christina. And here I am as a result of that, which is also a result of working closely and having the honor of collaborating for the past several years with Professor Romeo, who is very insightful and brilliant. And together we've had a lot of very powerful collaboration forged from a very similar experience of living in a patriarchy, even though we're in very different countries. But patriarchy is all over the world, and today we're going to engage our imaginations and act and understand that patriarchy is not inevitable. It is a system that requires constant reinforcement, and when we can take ourselves out of patriarchy and make an analysis, we'll come up with better answers that serve all of humanity. Okay. With that, the Bonobo Sisterhood, Revolution Through Female Alliance. So here is the cover of the book. It was designed by the artist Shepard Fairey, who was famous for creating the President Obama's Hope poster, so his work might be familiar to you. But he is part of the Bonobo Sisterhood. And one reason I mentioned this at the very beginning is that men have a role in joining the Bonobo Sisterhood. This is not a question of patriarchy versus women. This is a question of, really, of patriarchal social and political orders as the societal structure that we all live in, and how we can rise above that, and how to examine patriarchy in terms of how it might be actually hurting us and holding us back. But for any men in the audience, or whatever your gender is, you are absolutely warmly invited to become part of the Bonobo Sisterhood. So first I'm going to introduce you to bonobos. How many of you know what bonobos are? Okay, so not everybody. Bonobos are a type, they look like chimpanzees. They are, we'll see some pictures of them. They are primates who are as closely related to humans as chimpanzees are. So very significant that bonobos share 98.7% of their DNA with humans. So, as being one of our last common ancestors, it is absolutely worthwhile to look at bonobos and to look at their behavior and think of what it might imply for the behavior of humans. And just as an aside, we take for granted, we were talking last night a bit about this, that we test drugs on mice. And here we have bonobos who share 98.7% of our DNA. So I urge you to take seriously the model of bonobos. So they have a different social structure and organization, which is built upon female-female alliances. And this is how it works. If a bonobo female was aggressed upon by a male, she would let out a special cry that sounds a little like this. And all the other females within earshot, whether they know her, like her, or are related to her, come immediately to her aid, and they form an instantaneous coalition, and they fend off the male. And they send him into isolation, and then after a while, he'll come back into the troop, and they all have sex and make up and share food, and then he's not aggressive anymore. A critical point to remember is that bonobos evolutionarily have eliminated male sexual coercion. They're primates, and they have no sexual coercion. Are you interested in hearing the rest of this? This is pretty interesting, I think. So what can we learn from bonobos? One of the most important things, the first line of the book, is that bonobos are living proof that patriarchy is not inevitable. So for my talk today, it's going to be in 3 parts. The first part, 1, is why the law doesn't work for women. And even though I teach law and I've practiced law and I'm deeply embedded in law, I can tell you that law doesn't work for women. And we'll discuss why. The second part of the talk will explore some evolutionary biology and look a little bit more closely at bonobos. And then the third part of the talk is how to be a bonobo. And we can all be bonobos. And we can all be happier once we become bonobos, once we identify how to be a bonobo. All right, part 1, why the law doesn't work for women. So last year when I was here, my husband who's here with me, Terry Fisher, who I also should thank for all of his amazing support. We teach at Bocconi every fall for a couple weeks. And last year, we were here right at the time that the tragic homicide, the femicide of Giulia took place to Chechen. And the whole country was protesting, and there were vigils, and it was very moving. And as I started to research what happened to her and to research the laws and how effective are laws based on violence against women in Italy, I came across another case from just a few months before that of another Giulia who was murdered when she was 7 months pregnant by her ex-boyfriend. So there was this public outcry for Giulia last November. And what happens in most societies is that there's a highly public femicide, and people might protest about it, and they say what? They say, well, we need new laws. If we had just this law, then it wouldn't have happened. And I don't think that that's how it works, because law is so much more than the law on the books. Law in society means that laws have to be enforced, they have to be known, they have to be talked about, but most importantly, they need to be enforced. And also importantly, laws are not preventative. Laws deal with the unfortunate incident, in this case, tragic incidents, once they've happened. So that's not where a society interested in progress on human rights should be focused. Giulia's sister, Elena, made some very important points. She said the man who killed Giulia, her ex-boyfriend, is described as a monster, but he's not a monster. What he is a healthy son of the patriarchy and rape culture. And for Giulia, don't hold a moment of silence, but burn it all down. And this was a poster saying, if I'm not here tomorrow, burn it all down. And one of the things that really affected me was how much this femicide affected my students, because they were all in her age range, and they were all very, very terrified and taking very personally the idea that a boyfriend, that an intimate partner, would kill them. And it was really, it was tragic. It was a very tragic time. So a more recent poster about continuing the charge to burn it all down. I think we can think about burning down patriarchy, but I like to think of raising the bonobo sisterhood. And when you raise the bonobo sisterhood, the natural result is that we don't need patriarchy, that we've eliminated patriarchal violence, and we instead have a more equal society. So last year, everybody was saying, the time is now, we have to do something. And the Prime Minister said, every single woman killed because she is guilty of being free is an aberration. She also talked about patriarchy, and it was a somewhat hopeful time to hear what she was saying. And then she focused on laws, but actually the laws were they'd already been drafted the year before, but hadn't actually been passed. And then another politician talked about toxic patriarchal culture and how we can educate about alternatives to toxic patriarchal culture. But nothing's really happened, and there was an educational program that was authorized and then not implemented because of political bickering. So the big question is, how far can we go under patriarchal laws to actually help women become equal citizens? And I say, not very far. This was Giulia Tramontano, and the trial of her murderer just took place in September. It was also a very public femicide, very tragic, but nothing changed. So the question about, will any of this help is, I can answer no. So why not? And I think that part of why not is what I call the good girl trap of patriarchal democracy. And the question is, should we participate in this or should we opt out? And this is based on 2 decades of experience in working on women's rights. And this is my conception of how it goes. It's like a board game that looks like that. And there's first the injury. So something horrible has happened, and then what do people do? They go to their legislators, their lawmakers, and they say, we need a new law, and if we only had this law, then the whole thing wouldn't have happened. And then the legislators, whether they're in Italy or the United States or anywhere, take their time and they discuss it, and they have meetings and they have hearings and they take more time, and they have committees. Committees are very important because we have to talk about this more and more and more. We can't just pass laws. They have hearings where people come and tell their stories of what happened to them and then say, maybe this wouldn't have happened. And then it passes, but often what passes in the legislation is a shadow, really, of what the intent of the original legislation was. And then it's challenged. So somebody will take it to court and say, either this legislation is too broad, it covers too many things, or it's not going to be effective. We don't really need it because we already have it. And then it's either struck down or it's upheld but not enforced. And then you're back to square one. But you have no energy because you've just spent all of your energy, and your anger has been channeled into this legislative process. And as long as we keep thinking that this works for us, we're not going anywhere, in my opinion. So one of the things that's wrong with this picture, there are many things wrong with this picture, but one is the passive way in which we have agreed in Italy and in the United States and across the world to call the problem violence against women. So we're already divorcing the violence from its source, and then that means that the violence against women comes from where? So when President Clinton was in office, they created a Violence Against Women office at the Department of Justice. And I was the senior counsel in that office. And I would walk around the halls of the main Justice building in Washington, D.C., this beautiful building with its high, majestic ceilings. And I would ask people, why is my office called the Violence Against Women office? From whence does this violence come? So really thinking about that and reconceiving and refocusing what we think of. Jackson Katz is a close colleague of mine, and he has this linguistic experiment where he takes a sentence, John beat Mary, John is the subject. Mary is the object. Now we move to the second sentence. Mary was beaten by John. Now we've shifted our focus from John to Mary. And then the third sentence, John is dropped, and we have Mary was beaten. And then the last sentence is Mary is a battered woman. You see how that happened? This was a headline, Murder Has Abuse Victims Terrified, a long time ago in 1999. And I'll just give a very brief synopsis of what happened with this case. But murder is overwhelmingly, at least in the US, committed by men. Murder of women is overwhelmingly, over 99%, committed by men against women. And women are the ones whose victimization we measure. So this headline could have said, men have women terrified. And what this story told in the paper was about a woman named Carol Cross in a town in Lewiston, Maine, got an order of protection against her abusive partner that she had been with for 19 years and had 4 children with. And she finally, after years of abuse, got her order of protection, which is what we're told to do as good girls. And she went a couple days later with a police officer to her house to, I guess the order was served, and the police officer said, I'm here for the kids. And her partner, her ex-partner, said, okay, officer, I'm just gonna go upstairs and get some things or get my clothes, and bolted the door, went upstairs, pointed a rifle out the window, and shot Carol Cross while she was waiting in front of the police car and killed her. So in front of police, there's police presence, and this murder took place in front of the police, and the police did nothing to have prevented it. So totally tragic case, and usually after cases like this, where there's a failed order of protection, endangered women call for help. They say, I need an order of protection because I'm in a situation that's similar to this, and now I'm really afraid. And what happened in Lewiston, Maine was different because 75% of women who had orders of protection failed to show up for their hearings because they were too scared to go to court, because they were sure that they would get killed. Why were they sure they would get killed? Because their betters, their abusers, were cutting out articles from the paper and saying, go get your order of protection, you see what it did for her. And this was, to me, a complete deprivation of justice when you have no access to justice at all. And it was something about which I really wanted to do substantive action and figure out how to change this terrible equation. So part of this is asking the right questions and really just asking questions that flip our perspectives. So when we read a newspaper article, I'm gesturing like this, but nobody reads real newspapers anymore, right? So now we're just reading online. So we see a headline, and it says, woman murdered, husband sought. And we say to ourselves, well, that doesn't concern me, so we just turn the page. But I say, why isn't the husband the last person that we would suspect of murder? Why is he the first person that we suspect of murder? And it's a really, really, really messed up thing to think about, that he's the first suspect or that the ex-boyfriend is the first suspect. A lot of it is because of sexual jealousy and possessiveness, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but these signs were present in Julia's situation with her ex-boyfriend. And there's a well-known power and control wheel which you can all look up online. It's easily accessible. But the idea is that sometimes people in enforcement think like, have all abusive men read the same book? You know, why do they do so many, there's so many similarities when you look at orders of protection. And we've agreed tacitly as a society to just like integrate this into a system when it's outrageous. It's outrageous that every single day there are women who are in lethal danger of their lives asking a court, please, please, can I have this piece of paper? Can I have this little tiny drop, this little crumb of protection? And I've helped women through the years, and I still can't get over how many of them are in this situation. And that we as a society accept that so many women are in lethal danger from the people who are supposed to love them. The power and control wheel is emblematic of what some of these tactics are. There's using coercion and threats, using intimidation, isolation is really important, minimizing, denying, and blaming, using children, using economic abuse, using male privilege. These are all things, and there's a whole continuum of different types of male sexual coercion and violence that go from when on one end of the continuum would be economic and emotional abuse. And that's where you can stop it, actually, is that just to know that you have the self-esteem that girls and women are entitled not to take any disrespect emotionally or economically, and just, you know, we have one life on this earth, and to say, I don't have time for that. You know, I'm here to live my life, and it will not be shadowed. I will not accept any shadows. But then it moves along to physical assault or sexual assault, and then the police might be called. And if the justice system doesn't respond in a way that offers actual protection, then the woman is in more danger than if she never called in the first place, because now the male can identify with law enforcement and say, see, they don't care. What are you going to do now? There's an equality wheel that I would encourage you all to look up, which replaces the power and control wheel and talks about equal relationships and what are markers of equal relationships. So there's negotiation and fairness, non-threatening behavior, honesty and accountability, respect, shared responsibility, and economic partnership. So I give my students copies of this and tell them to put it on their refrigerators so they all have that in mind. And I would encourage you all to put it on your refrigerators. Print it out. Maybe it's in Italian. Many years ago, when I first started working on domestic violence, I had said in an editorial to the Chicago Tribune that domestic violence homicide is so predictable as to be preventable. And it is absolutely the most preventable type of crime because he always tells her, I'm going to kill you. And we know in the victim-offender relationship, we know who the intended victim is. So why don't we do better on this? And we don't. We have danger assessments that some jurisdictions use, a lot of them don't, but all of them, the first question should and must be, how much danger is this partner posing to this woman who is seeking help? And the three main questions that would screen you in as a high-risk case are, does he have a weapon? Has he threatened to kill you? Do you think he could kill you? And if the answer is yes to any of those questions, it's a high-risk case that could and should be managed by a high-risk team. Because it turns out that laws, if enforced, can stop escalation from happening through offender accountability. So I've worked for many years on promoting the high-risk team model to really provide accountability as the system should and could. And I also, I'm not going to address this too much today, but I spearheaded legislation to authorize GPS monitoring for high-risk domestic violence offenders. And that's been really useful because when there's a violation of it, police can immediately go to protect the intended victim and save her life. And it has saved lives. So I'm happy about that. And we have that now in more than half of the states in the US and several other countries. Okay. Here's my book. I'm going to read you the beginning of chapter 2. Chapter 2 is called Men's Castles, Women's Shelters. Thud. The thud of a man's footstep on the stairs. To the wife in the kitchen, it is a signal to be obeyed. As soon as she hears it, she is to get the food onto the table so that the temperature is perfect when he sits down to be served. She waits in the kitchen, steadying herself with one hand on the cold marble counter, frozen until she hears that thud. Any misstep will be punished. She would like to avoid that if possible. The woman in the kitchen is Patricia McLean, and the footstep belonged to her ex-husband, Don McLean, the famous musician who wrote American Pie and the sweet, sensitive song Starry, Starry Night about Vincent van Gogh. This is what the public knows. What Patricia knew the night she called 911 was that he was going to kill her. Quote, he was trying to shove open the locked bathroom door behind which I had barricaded myself. As it was splintering, I pushed the numbers 911. I believed when he broke through, he would kill me. A photo of the splintered door chills one to the bone, capturing what Patricia was going through when she called 911. The police came, arrested Don, and took him to the police station, where he posted $10,000 bail and was released. He later pled guilty to charges of domestic violence assault, domestic violence criminal threatening, criminal restraint, and criminal mischief, and he paid over $3,000 in fines. But you would not be able to find this in the court records because under Maine's deferred disposition law, if he did not violate the terms of his bail, such as no contact and no further crimes for 1 year, the crimes to which he pled guilty would be expunged. As in so many domestic violence cases, the punishment does not come close to fitting the crime. The fine is barely a slap on the wrist. The sentence requirements are structured in such a way as to let the offender construct a narrative that completely absolves him of responsibility. It hardly reflects the terroristic control he exerted over his family. What it does reflect is that the ancient maxim that a man's home is his castle is alive and well. A footstep on the stair, and he was catered to. He exerted his patriarchal authority through violence, threats, and emotional abuse, all without meaningful outside intervention. The inhabitants of the castle all knew their subservient roles. Patricia worked constantly to keep the peace and to placate him, lest he unleash a rage-filled attack. They lived in a house on a hill, far away enough so that from the neighbors that no one could hear the screams. The McLean family was white, wealthy, and living in an idyllic town in Maine with quaint shops and a beautiful harbor filled with sailboats. Yet the type of tyrannical control exerted by this king in his castle is substantially similar to men's reigns in homes across all economic and cultural lines. So you think about if Patricia was wealthy and white and had all of these resources at hand, she was much luckier than most of her sisters who don't share that privilege. That's 911. So thinking about men's castles and how did we get here? And a lot of my work has been like figuring out like how do we have courtrooms filled with terrified women every single day and courts handing out these orders of protection as if they're just normal, how did we get here? So legal history is how we got here. And here's your little lesson, little but significant lesson on legal history, okay? In Blackstone's commentaries from the mid-18th century, he wrote about the difference in marriage law between a husband killing his wife and a wife killing her husband. If a husband killed his wife, it was legally the same as if he had killed a stranger. If a wife killed her husband, it was an act of treason for which she would be put to death. And that's kind of all I have to say about that. An act of treason is an act of betrayal to your country. So when you say, like, why do men think that they're kings? Because they appointed themselves as kings of their own castle in exchange for other men's agreement not to intervene in their family structure. So family is structured around this idea that there's a king who has the right to rule over his family. And the idea of equating killing a husband with treason instead of killing in self-defense, which is what happens in almost all cases where women kill their husbands or their ex-husbands, is unbelievable. But that's how it works. So we have men's castles and we have women's shelters. And by definition, a colleague of mine, Kelly Dunn, from the Jeannie Geiger Crisis Center in Newburyport, pointed out that the women in shelters are by definition in the most danger. They're at the highest level, they're at the red flag zone, the highest level of risk. So much so that they have uprooted their entire support systems to go into hiding and pray that their predatory husband or boyfriend doesn't find them. And I just don't think that this is acceptable. I think we fail to question it, and we really, really have to question it. In my questioning of it, I wrote my LLM thesis on exactly this topic, and it's called "Why Doesn't He Leave?" And we always ask, well, what, in an abusive relationship or a homicide, a femicide, we say, well, why didn't she leave? And it's like, that calls for a lot of reexamination. I mean, the idea is that the only institutional reflection that we have in society of domestic violence is battered women's shelters. But those weren't created to solve the question. They were created to save women from predictably dangerous escalative violence against them by their known abusers. This is a lot. It's a lot on a Sunday afternoon. I really appreciate you all staying with me. You can all take a breath if you would like. I'm going to. So here's a little bit of humor, but this idea of the male protection racket and how girls and women are brought up to believe that we need men for protection. And the question is, against whom do we need protection? Anyone? Okay, we'll get to that if none of you knows the answer to that. That's okay. This is just from Barbie, which I thought was a great movie. Why didn't Barbie tell me about patriarchy, which, to my understanding, is where men and horses run everything? I appreciated that a movie about Barbie took on patriarchy and at least got the conversation going. I appreciate that the protests and all the feelings behind the protests in Italy about femicide have questioned patriarchy. And I think it's really critical that we start thinking about alternatives to patriarchy. This was just a picture from the Barbie movie where it's a bunch of men talking, and Ken is he's learning about patriarchy, and he's watching these men talk, and a woman comes in, and she has something to say to these men, and one of the men says, "Not now, Margaret," and just excludes her. And that seemed to me a very poignant moment. Okay, but this is the fallacy of the male protection racket, and you do notice that I spelled it with a PH, which just came out of my pen one morning when I was writing, and I thought I should keep it because it was kind of amusing. Many years ago, I was on a plane and I saw this ad for Safety Man, and I thought it was very funny. So I'm going to read it to you. I'll do it slowly for translation purposes. Don't travel without Safety Man as your bodyguard. Safety Man is a life-size simulated male that appears to be 180 pounds and 6 feet tall to give others the impression that you are protected by a male guardian while at home alone or driving in your car. The unique security device looks incredibly real, with a positionable latex head and hands, airbrushed facial highlights, and salt and pepper hair. Made of the highest quality vinyl, blah, blah, blah. I mean, so first I was laughing about this, and then thinking just how the marketing is so sad. You know, the idea that we would have to, if we reduce a male to essentialism, that's what we would need, or that's what we're taught we need males for protection, but it's protection from other males. So that's the fallacy, that if girls don't learn their own power of protection, and women, and we only learn that we depend upon men to defend us, then guess what? We give men the power to decide who among us is worth defending, and who is worth violating, who is worth prostituting, and who is worth protecting. And it turns out none of us are really worth protecting, and what we have to do is protect ourselves and our sisters. So I'm going to fly through a little bit the theory of patriarchal violence. How much time? How am I doing on time?
No, go on. Yeah.
Okay.
Go on.
The theory of patriarchal violence is an attempt to explain the prevalence and variation of male sexual coercion and violence around the world. So it happens around the world, and the World Health Organization measures it every few years. And there's no place where women are like completely safe and equal. But to explain this, I think that the level of patriarchal violence is explained by the violence that is necessary to maintain a patriarchal social order. In the United States, it's a very high level of patriarchal violence that we tolerate. And I wrote an article, if anyone is interested, on this called Sexual Coercion, Patriarchal Violence and Law. And in the United States, women have no legal rights to protect them from male sexual violence, and that at the highest level of law. So in two cases that I won't go into in detail, the first one involved a federal law that gave women, it was part of the Violence Against Women Act, and it gave women a right to be free, a civil right to be free from gender-motivated violence. And this was like the most significant legal right that I have seen in my practice. And the Supreme Court struck it down on completely invalid grounds that were just structured and pretextual to say, oh, we can't have this law. This is unconstitutional to think that we could give women this kind of a civil right. And then, so women have no right to be free from male sexual violence and from gender-motivated violence, they called it in the act. And in the second case, the first case was called U.S. versus Morrison, and the second case is the town of Castle Rock, Colorado versus Gonzalez. And in that case, the court held that a woman has no right to enforcement of her order of protection, even though she lived in a state that had a particular law saying police must enforce orders of protection. So there was a mandatory enforcement law, because guess what? Police weren't enforcing orders of protection. And the court said, Scalia in particular said, well, I usually defer to states' rights, but when they said shall, they couldn't have meant shall enforce orders of protection because that would create a burden on law enforcement. And this was a case where a woman's 3 children, 3 daughters, were kidnapped by her estranged husband, and over the course of the night, and several phone calls and a visit to the police station where they absolutely refused to do anything, the man killed his daughters. So it was a very sympathetic case, and that the court struck down that, in that case, was really obscene. But I'm skipping through this so that we can talk about a little bit more about bonobos. So this is the bonobo principle. This is the heart of the bonobo activity. And if you agree with these 2 principles, then you are part of the bonobo sisterhood. The first is, no one has the right to harm my sister. And by harm, I mean to include everything: to abuse, exploit, gaslight, assault, pimp, etc., 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 my sister. Do you all agree with that? That nobody has the right to abuse your sister? Okay. Second thing that the bonobos seem to act upon is the idea that everybody's your sister. So it's just as simple as that you hear a call for help and you help, and whether you know her, like her, or are related to her. The things that women and girls have been taught to divide against each other, these patriarchal divisions that we judge each other instead of spending our time and our energy on so many other things that are more important. Our patriarchal divisions are just that. And what unites us is so much more important than what divides us. And if we can just really train ourselves to stop judging other women and stop dividing against other women in our own heads, and instead really see each other as sisters, and know that if you're at a train station and you see a woman and you see this man kind of around her and you feel like, I don't think this is a safe situation, that you go over and you stand next to her. And that often, just standing next to your sister, even if she's a complete stranger, can avoid a situation. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about evolutionary biology. But this is how I got here. This is Richard Wrangham. And Richard is an anthropologist who taught at Harvard for many years. And he's the one who taught me about bonobos. And he wrote a book called Demonic Males and Apes and the Origins of Human Violence. And a very short oversimplification of this book is that chimpanzee males will batter repeatedly their female partners, the females that they want to reproduce with. So chimpanzees batter their female reproductive partners. Silverback gorillas and so many other primates and monkeys commit infanticide of an infant that's not their own. And these are in one male units where the alpha male will then integrate the female into their harem. So infanticide is very, very common throughout primates. And orangutans force copulations in a way that looks like rape. And it's kind of weird and uncomfortable to say that orangutans rape, but they do. They force sexual copulations, and they measure this by the females screaming and fighting and kicking and trying to fight back. Friendships and baboons. Females will form friendships with certain males for protection from other males, so just the other male protection racket. This is the cover of the book in which my article on patriarchal violence is published, and it's sexual coercion in primates and humans. And if you look closely, first it's kind of cute. These are cute baboons. But if you look more closely, these are hamadryas baboons, and he's just given her a neck bite. And this is a one-male unit where the alpha male is in charge, and he has to move from place to place, so he has to keep his females together. And first he'll stare and glare at a female if she's kind of getting too far away, like she might escape from the harem. And then if that doesn't work, he will give her a neck bite. There's mate guarding in primates and humans. Mate guarding and sexual jealousy underlie much male domestic violence, and mate guarding takes the form of imposed isolation, which is the first tactic of batterers that we saw in the power and control wheel. And you should all look out for this in relationships of your families and friends, and see if somebody is becoming isolated in a relationship, because if she is, it's not a good sign, and there are ways to intervene. There are so many similarities in primate sexual coercion and human sexual coercion, but I want to move on to comparing bonobos to chimps, because when I met Richard back in 2004, and he taught me about bonobos, my mind was blown. And what we did was create together a course on theories of sexual coercion that we co-taught between Harvard Law School and the Human and Evolutionary Biology Department, in part because I really wanted to see if the bonobos were real, like if this was a real theory, or if it was just my optimism. And I'm happy to tell you that this is a real theory. This is like bonobos are real. They're getting a lot more attention and study now. There's a new-ish book on bonobos and chimps. There are actually 2 of them, and bonobos are like, now you're going to start hearing about bonobos all the time if you just kind of tune your ear toward it. But why you should want to be a bonobo instead of a chimpanzee? Bonobos have more sex than chimpanzees and probably than humans. So they use sex to diffuse tension and to establish bonds, and before sharing food. No sexual coercion in bonobos, excessive sexual coercion in chimps so that the females are constantly stressed. No lethal violence. And that's really something that separates bonobos from the rest of their primate relatives. So chimpanzees, when they meet another chimpanzee group, they have lethal violence over territories. Lethal violence. And bonobos don't. When bonobos meet another troop, they share food, they laugh. Sometimes 1 or 2 of them will go off with the new troop. One of my favorite words is xenophilic, which means they love strangers, as opposed to chimpanzees, who are xenophobic, and they're afraid of strangers, and that's why they lash out violently. Bonobos share food. Chimpanzees fight over food so much that they cannot ethically do experiments on food sharing in chimpanzees, because they know that violence will erupt. Evolutionary biology has revealed to me that patriarchy has an architecture, and that architecture is male-male alliance, and that male alliance is undergirded and enforced through sexual coercion and through an agreement not to intervene in another male's sexual coercion of his female. of his reproductive resource. Why this matters? It matters for everything. One thing is thinking about at the highest level of really like who can speak the language of violence is war. This was a New Yorker cover about Ukraine a couple years ago, and the woman is, trying to protect the children while the man is at war. And this is just a picture of patriarchy. And it doesn't have to be like this. Like, how did we get to the point where men design these weapons and all this money is put into defending territories and countries, and women and children are the ones to be defended, but they're at risk for this male violence that they have no real role in. So bonobos don't have war. Bonobos are peaceful. Bonobos are our relative. We don't actually have to have wars. If we had enough female alliance, we can really disrupt patriarchy. This is just an example of, this was a congressional hearing on contraception, and it's all men talking about contraception, which is male control over females as reproductive resources. In bonobos, because they have no sexual coercion, they have reproductive autonomy. Oh my God. We don't have that in the United States. We used to, but our Supreme Court decided that was too much, too many rights for women. So you need to be a bonobo. Everybody would do better to have wanted sex instead of compliant sex. In bonobos, the males initiate often, and if the female is not as interested in sexual relations as the male is, he understands. Like, no means no, and he walks away. In humans, we don't have that level of comprehension yet, but bonobos have figured this out. And males are favorably recepted 70% of the time that they initiate, which is higher than human males. Bonobos give us hope for peace, for overcoming patriarchal divisions, and for showing us and making us understand that what unites us is really being subject to the threat of male sexual coercion is much stronger than what divides us. So I want you to think about being bonobo. The heart of the book, the part where there's like an uplift in the book, because the first part, everything I've told you is kind of depressing, so except for the bonobos, because the bonobos really give us hope. And Chapter 6 is called A Self-Worth Defending. And when you take self-defense, it changes everything. Because as girls, we're often taught that we're weak and that males are stronger, which is why we need males to protect us. But actually, you learn the power of your own body to defend yourself, and that translates into your mind as, wow, I have a self-worth defending. I can do this by myself. And then once you understand your power to self-defend, it makes you able to defend your sisters. And that's really, really powerful. So the big project of the book, the big takeaway, is to create Bonobo Sisterhood self-worth defending classes where you learn that you have a self-worth defending. You all, I am telling you this, you all have selves worth defending, all of you. And I beseech you all to take self-defense classes because they're really transformative. One of the stories I tell at the beginning of the book is of a female runner in Portland, Oregon, and she was training for a race, and she stopped in a park bathroom. and this man came out of the stall and started trying to sexually assault her. And she just kept fighting and fighting, and she kept saying, "Not today." I'm not going to swear, but she said, "Not today." And she had taken a self-defense class like 3 weeks earlier from her employer, and she was able to fight this guy off, and somebody else came to her aid, and they were able to restrain him until the police came. And then she started a small nonprofit called Not Today. And just knowing like that you can fight back, that you have the right to fight back, is really an important step. It's an important step towards an entitlement that we don't always think we have. Self-defense teaches the importance of setting boundaries and knowing that you're entitled to enforce them. And we're often taught as girls to feel bad if we say, well, no, I don't want to, if you don't want to do something, don't do it. And set your boundaries and say, I'm not comfortable with that, back off. Instead of worrying about being polite, don't be polite. And then you learn you can defend someone else. A couple quick examples of successful bonobo sisterhood in action are, there's a group of self-defense women in Columbus, Ohio, and they contacted me to ask if they could use the Bonobo Sisterhood idea to give an award to their founders. And I said, of course, because this isn't my book. This is a book like people can take it and do what they want with it. Create your own Bonobo Sisterhoods. I don't have any proprietary rights. I just want people to know what their rights are. And like Professor Romeo said, that to use your imagination and to imagine that you do have the right to defend yourself, and that you have the right to defend your sister, and that nobody has the right to abuse you, and that everybody's your sister. So this was the first group to graduate, and this was the Bonobo Sisterhood Award given to the two founders of the group. And this was just a beautiful picture that they sent me after the award ceremony, which I really loved. I just want to go through a couple other questions before I conclude. One is about the idea of equality and what sex equality means. The bonobos did all of this without laws or a constitution. In our constitutions, we always think about equality, and we think about equality for women in terms of how we stack up against men. So, economic equality, men make this much money compared to women who make less, women of color make even less. So we use men as the standard. All men are created equal. And I think that another imagination experiment is to say, all women are created equal. And if we start from there, and each of us starts to interrogate our own privileges and thinks about how to share our privileges among one another, we could create an entirely new system of a bonobo sisterhood. And in this system, where we value and share our own resources, we could have like a whole different economic system that really has to do with equality. So I think of cryptocurrency. So it was started like 7 years ago by these Wall Street brothers, and it's just imagination. Like, what is cryptocurrency? Like, how are these things being traded for so much money? Who really knows what cryptocurrency is? And I would say, if that created a currency, why not have a bonobo currency where women value what they do economically that is not valued in a patriarchal capitalist system? So care comes to mind. Care is only valued if it's exported from the family. But women and girls don't get paid for the care that they provide at home, right? It has no value unless you're paying someone else to do it. And protection. We all have the ability to protect each other's children, and we all should and must be doing this. So I really want to develop, I think the next book is about bonobo currency. but also healing patriarchal divisions by rejecting them psychologically and in action. Like thinking when we see another woman that we don't judge her and instead say, she can do what she wants, she's still my sister, I would protect her. Bottom line. I am not free while any woman is unfree. That all women are created equal. If we're being like bonobos, we can share food. And food is a really important resource. In the US, we could feed the country twice over every single day with the amount of food waste that we produce. So we can really think about like new ways, we can really imagine of new ways of being informed by and modeled after the bonobos. And most importantly, I'm going to give you an example of a bonobo sisterhood thing that happened exactly 2 weeks ago, where another faculty member called me, and I was not expecting his call, but it turned out his wife had a friend who was in trouble, and she was wondering if I could help. And I said, okay, what's going on? And her friend's husband, so the friend was female, and her friend's husband was in jail because he assaulted her in front of their 7-week-old baby. He assaulted her while he was trying to get her phone away from her. Isolation. You can't call for help. You can't talk to anyone else about how I reign in my home. And she wants to help, and she doesn't know what to do. So I start thinking, she's in a different state. So I start thinking, well, I know this person in the state, and I know this person, and maybe I can cobble together some kind of protection network for your friend by calling in these people and asking them if they will pay attention to this case. Because we cannot trust that we pay attention to these cases that are very potentially dangerous. And then I said, wait a second. That's completely unstable and unreliable. I said, what we need to do is get her back to her bonobo sisterhood. And she had moved to a state to be with her husband, but she really wanted to be in another state where her family was and her friends were and her bonobo sisterhood was. And it took a lot of talking to her because, she wanted to make up with her husband, and he only does it when he's drunk, but he actually wasn't drunk when he did it. He was drunk the night before when they started fighting, but he wasn't drunk that morning when he woke up and assaulted her. But it took a lot of, it's not that, I explained to her, it's not that you don't love him, it's that you don't love his behavior. His behavior is unacceptable. And if he's doing this while you have a 7-week-old, it's only going to get worse. So it turned out that the woman, who's the wife of the faculty member, also went to visit, she and another friend went to visit the woman to help her, and they got her out. And this is a picture of her on the plane with her baby. Peace. So thank you. If you want to order the book, it's not translated yet into Italian, but Blackwell's, I understand, is a UK book distributor that will distribute to Europe pretty easily. If you want to talk further about this, my email is rosenfeld@law.harvard.edu. And I've created and am in the process of starting a nonprofit called the Bonobo Sisterhood Alliance. And I welcome all of your help and support in making this a reality in life. So thank you so much. Thank you. Oh. Thank you. Okay.
Bene,
Wow.
credo che insomma
Well then,
i commenti siano francamente inutili.
there is no need to say anything on my part, I think. Just one thing I'd like to say. I'd like to emphasize this fil rouge evolution. We started with Francis Arnold, who said that within evolution we may find solutions to fight diseases, such as her discovery of enzymes allowed her to find new ways to develop new drugs and many more things. And here too, we need to look to evolution to try and understand which issues have already been addressed by nature for our species to evolve. And perhaps by taking a closer look at nature, getting a better understanding, we might find new solutions. Next, we'll listen to Rachele Paolucci Michelacci, who will talk about the issue of gender discrimination in people with disability. This is often overlooked, but just as serious, as severe. We have some stories from Diane, but many more could be recounted. So that's why not only did we want to thank her association for multiple sclerosis, but also to listen to Rachele. So since Rachele is part of these 100 sentinel women, and these women, I think, could be very well part of the Bonobo alliances, taking up Diane's invitation. So thank you so much, Rachel, for being here. We'd like to thank the Italian Association for Multiple Sclerosis for your sponsorship. Professor Gianvito, we are the one thanking you on behalf of our association for kindly inviting us here today. It's an honor for me and for my association to be the last voice in this session. We'd like to thank Professor Rosenfeld for her valuable lecture. We'll treasure it. For us of the Italian Multiple Sclerosis Association, the theme of domestic violence against women and discrimination as a whole is important, but especially domestic violence is a pressing issue because multiple sclerosis tends to mainly affect women.
La violenza di genere, il mio contributo oggi sta nel dire che la violenza.
What I'd like to say today is that gender violence, especially against women with disability, is a multifaceted issue, often underestimated. We have no aggregate numbers. I was talking with our guest today. I mean, it's quite significant the fact we have no data because it means that something is being concealed, something that should resurface. But we do have some data. In 2022, we know that 11.2% of Italian women who went to anti-violence centers were disabled. This finding comes from the Italian Institute for Statistics, so ISTAT. And we know that not all women ringing up these anti-violence centers are disabled. Perhaps they do not just state it. It may be more than that. We know that in the vast majority of cases, women's abusers tend to be in their close center, either the woman's partner or the woman's caregiver, if we're talking about women with disability. Then we've got the FISH, the Italian Federation for Overcoming Handicaps, according to which violence is not just physical in nature. In women with disability, as well as in all the other women, but I suppose more for the former, violence takes on an economic characteristic too, which means that 64% of women with a disability does not have an income allowing them to be economically self-sufficient. And that means that they become overly dependent on their caregiving partner. And then we've got another interesting tool. What we use is a barometer, a paper we issue every year. It's a paper that takes a snapshot. It makes us understand everything about MS in Italy in terms of expense as well as social impact. According to the latest paper in 2023, it turned out that 30% of Italian women with MS, multiple sclerosis, was discriminated against, especially in their employment. And 12% of women with disability or women with MS do not feel safe. That's what Professor Rosenfeld was saying. This is quite disquieting, the fact that we do not feel safe. And 30% of us is abused, economically, verbally abused, and in general, our freedom is restricted. This is violence too. When you don't feel free to express yourself and to live your life freely, then that's violence too. I would like then to give my testimonial as a woman with disability, a woman with MS, a woman who has abused, not just as a member of the female gender, but also as someone with MS. I'm part of this association, AISM, an association that fights against discrimination day in and day out. And we decided to take a practical approach, so much so that one of the priority items of our 2025 agenda, then one of the top priorities is to beat gender discrimination. The IDEA project that was established in 2019, we established a network, if I may call it, in a bonobo sisterhood. It's 100 of us, 100 women who were trained specifically. I mean, it took some time. No winging in this case. So we're trained to support our women in Italy. We've got 98 chapters in Italy. So we are quite pervasive on the Italian geography. So that's why we have these sentinels to empower women with disability. And that was step one. A further step forward was made with a second project that is translated as let's change the ending. Because once again, the idea is to establish networks, once again, an alliance, a cooperation, a partnership, and exchange experiences to combat discrimination and violence against women. Discrimination, as I said, is a multifaceted entity. If I may, I would like to talk about an example. Let's assume that you are run over by a car and you are injured. Immediately after that, another car drives by and runs over again. The injuries we receive from the second car will have a multiplier effect because we were already injured the first time round. So that's how I imagine multiple discrimination. It's a sort of spiral, a vortex that doesn't just enhance the effects of discrimination, but does multiply it. So the journey a woman with disability has to embark upon is a very complex and challenging one, too. What can we do? What sort of intervention? Well, by then joining our forces with the institutions, the associations, as well as all stakeholders involved and concerned. And that's something we have been practically doing by signing memorandums of understanding, such as we have an alliance with tax consultants because we want to single out any economic dependencies. We join forces with lawyers, legal counsels, and as we say, Professor Rosenfeld, we need to partner with universities to network. So the name of the second project, Let's Change the Ending, I hope won't just be the empty name of a project. It does need to end up in really changing the ending, turning it into a happy ending for women with disability. Thank you. Thank you, Rachel, for your personal story and for everything you've said. I have nothing to say. Perhaps we can open the discussion to the audience. This time round, I won't start with Dante, our habitual asker, but with Claudia in the front row.
Prego, Claudia.
Grazie professoressa per la sua lezione.
Thank you so much, Professor Rosenfeld, for your lecture. I think we all wished we descended from bonobos, but unfortunately there are chimpanzees too. Is there a scientific explanation whereby bonobo females have evolved like that, unlike chimpanzees? And then question number 2, we need to engage with males and men too, otherwise we won't address the problem. In my opinion, there are some good laws in Italy, but then they may not be properly enforced. But the laws are there in Italy. And now we have a program too, whereby people who have been sentenced for a violence crime, if they want to then benefit from certain advantages, they need to do certain things. Would you have some good and positive examples in the US? I mean, if someone doesn't want to go to prison, you know, maybe if the person needs to attend a certain training, an educational path, because everything is about prevention, isn't it?
Yes. So as I said in the beginning, men, and no matter what your gender is, you are part of the Bonobo sisterhood. One thing that I have spent a lot of imagination on is the idea of having detention facilities for batterers. So as a result of being found responsible for intimate partner violence, right now the solution is either jail or no jail, and we don't have a good intermediate response that actually addresses the violence. And this is because of a lack of demand and a lack of imagination. So we have this whole world where women cling to these orders of protection hoping that they might work, but when we really focus on the offender, there's so much that can be done to put him into a situation where he is rehabilitated, similar to how bonobos will exclude the aggressive male until he's learned his lesson and he comes back and then everybody is happy. About your first question, we have evolved similarly from bonobos and chimps because of our shared ancestry and shared DNA at 98.7%. So bonobos are a much smaller population. They're found only in the Congo, and whereas chimpanzees are all over. And one of the differences might be about, it's theorized, access to food, that the bonobos where they are in the Congo don't have competition for access to good food, so they share it, and that might have been part of that development. Thank you. And
Bene, c'è una domanda qua in secondo fila, prego.
One question here, please. Thank you very much.
Prego, prego.
Devo alzarmi?
Shall I stand? If you wish to do so. Yes, this way we can see you. Thank you very much.
Mi ricollego alla domanda che mi ha...
I refer back to the previous question and this aspect related with imagination.
Dopo le cose così intense che ha detto,
After what you said,
invitarla a chiedermi una cosa marginale.
I might be asking a marginal question, and being law experts, we know how words are important. And while listening to you, I wondered why you opted for the word sisterhood, so much so that at the beginning of your speech, you had to expand the meaning of the word, saying men are warmly welcomed to be part of such a sisterhood. And when you spoke about the 6th chapter of your book, then I understood why you decided to use this word, sisterhood, and I'd like you to expand on this. Is this a call to the arms? Is it an invitation to action? Is it an invitation to women to act? But patriarchy doesn't only concern domestic violence. Any kind of abuse falls within such a realm. And here we go back to what professor from the University of Bocconi said about imagination. The Italian Constitution, before stating in Article 3 about equality, speaks under Article 2 of solidarity, and a reference by the founding fathers of Italy was to refer to égalité, fraternité, liberté. She couldn't find the third word, but the founding fathers didn't opt for brotherhood, but opted for solidarity. They chose this word because if you want to write a constitution, you have a dream of what you want to become. And they thought of a word which is much broader, to engage men, to make them feel part of this society. So not just a sisterhood, but solidarity. In my opinion, the word solidarity is more effective, more ambitious. Why did you opt for the word sisterhood and not solidarity?
Thank you. That was a very thoughtful exposition. Because based on the bonobos, it is a male-female activity. So the females come to one another's aid, as I said, whether they know her, like her, or are related to her. So in the bonobos, it is a sisterhood, or it looks like something to which we could refer as a sisterhood. So that's why, because I'm trying to promote the idea in our imaginations that we can be like bonobos. And when I say on top of that, I mean, we're humans and we have language. So thinking about inviting everybody into this umbrella, and everybody who can recognize that they are harmed by patriarchal violence, because there's so much violence that's men on men and hierarchical impositions of violent hierarchies, basically, that is patriarchal violence as well. Like if you think about fraternities and hazing or the army or other military groups that have, in order to be part of the group, you have to go through subjecting yourself to violence that's enacted upon the less powerful members by the more powerful members so that they then can be part of the membership. And that that's a very interesting example of patriarchal violence, everything that goes on like in military training. So I welcome, in a human way, anybody who wants to challenge patriarchal violence. Thanks for your question. And was Professor Romeo,
Yes,
you were going to have some questions?
Graziella,
I was ready for my questions.
Da costituzionalista magari un commento.
Yes, and we might hear from her.
Sulla Costituzione.
As to the Constitution Italian Constitution using the word solidarity, I have to say one important thing that is often forgotten. In the Constitutional Assembly of Italy, there were 22 women, not many, but these were 22 women who contributed to writing not just Article 2 and 3, but also articles on motherhood, first part of the Constitution. And these 22 women were asked to focus on articles such as motherhood, leaves, the labor world, decided to write also other articles. So they opted for the word solidarity instead of sisterhood, because there was a female contribution that prevented associating the word solidarity with brotherhood, because in Italian we use the male adjective to say that we speak about the constitutional founding fathers, but there were also mothers, there were also women, and they expressly wanted to deal with the articles that are associated with women, such as motherhood and the family, but I also dealt with issues that were not only dealing with women, such as politics. So I'd like to refer back to what was said before about laws, Italian laws. The problem with Western legal systems, we have this kind of problem, is that very many of these laws were enforced by parliaments where the percentage of women is very low. When world parliaments had very high percentages of women members, these percentages never exceeded 28%. The parliament with more women is a parliament where 28% is women. And this is the most representative parliament for women in the world. This can tell us plenty about the content of these laws. For instance, the Blackstone's commentaries, which was mentioned by Professor Rosenfeld, the state lays down that if you kill your husband, this is high treason, while if the husband kills the wife, then it is a standard crime, an ordinary crime. Until the first half of the 19th century, we had laws whereby women were not credible, so they cannot be witnesses in a trial, or laws whereby women could not inherit. And this is actually a rule that you find in Iran, but this was a law in the UK. What did this entail for a lot of women? Speaking about economic violence, the access to wealth depends on a man. If I am the daughter of a rich landlord in England, to have access to my father's wealth, I must hope that my father never dies, or I must hope to get married, because unless I get married, I won't have access to such a wealth. But to the male who might not be my father's son, but just his cousin, but was born man. So think of what this meant for many women, many generations of women. It was the law that laid down that women had no access to wealth. Wealth was handed down from a man to another man, and this for many centuries, until when the law was considered unconstitutional. And in countries that adopted the common law, the UK common law, this rule was made unconstitutional just a couple of years ago. In many African countries, women had no access to wealth if there was no man. So there are laws, and this is what the feminist literature is telling us, that there are stereotypes which are not visible, but that are out there. And I'll quote another example. Up to some years ago, laws in many countries with respect to citizenship imposed upon married women to acquire their husband's citizenship, because it is the husband who can decide where he and she must reside. And it is just for a few years now that the right to keep one citizenship has become a human right, because in this manner the woman is not forced to acquire the same husband's citizenship. And one might think of the law. If I get married, I'll get my husband's citizenship. I'm married to a French, and I would like to be a French citizen. It is nice. In my specific case, this is nice, but in many other cases, that kind of citizenship is not welcomed. This is what we should be understanding about laws. They might sound neutral or suitable to solve problems, but as a matter of fact, they are tyrannical, because the devil is in the details. Very clear.
Non possiamo non far fare una domanda a Dante, perché sennò...
We'll allow Dante one question, as usual. First off, thank you so much for your presentation, as well as for all of your take-home messages. I'll be brief. How important were monotheistic religions in determining over the centuries the relationship between men and women, and therefore patriarchy too?
I'll keep my answer very brief, very. And they still are.
Sì, se posso permettermi, siccome è un tema di...
If I may chip in, because that's a theme we discussed last night too, monotheistic religions placing man on top of the pyramid did not consider the human environment, which is just as important. So that's why we need to go back to evolution, because we've lost a lot of information. We have been centering around the idea that, hierarchically speaking, the person, the human being was the model we should refer to. So that's why religions have greatly contributed to our current state of things. And then we're all accountable. So we might actually pass a historical judgment. Are there any other questions from the floor? One down there. And then Paola. I have a question for Professor Rosenfeld. It's interesting to hear that there is a good example, that of bonobos. But at the moment, are there any countries we might look to as a role model? Whilst you were talking, I looked around and I was looking at the ranking of countries with the highest femicide rates. I saw countries in South America, Russia, where the highest rates are found. Italy and the States look apparently a bit better, and then we go to northern countries. But I was quite surprised to see that we find Greece among the best ones. Because culturally speaking, one would think the patriarchy has always been the cipher Greece. How come then?
I think that the Nordic countries usually come out the highest, and where they have like higher numbers of women in their cabinets and in their higher positions of government, where government in your imagination is like the highest levels are either equally between men and women, or a significant more than 30% of the parliament might be women. And that's a start. I think you can also look to laws on prostitution, where there are progressive laws on prostitution that would understand that the woman needs help getting out, because research shows that that's the thing that they most want, and that where you impose responsibility on the buyer and the offender, and you see what is really behind the crimes of prostitution, which in the Nordic countries, they have adopted the Nordic model. So those countries are ahead. In the US, we lose 3 to 4 women a day to intimate partner homicide. So that adds up to 1 tower from the Twin Towers in New York that got bombed on September 11th. We lose a tower of women a year. So we still have a ways to go as well. But it really can be prevented if we're like bonobos. So if we hear the call that somebody is in an abusive relationship, and we can summon our forces and go in and extricate her or help her. And one really practical way to do this is about self-defense. So if you say to a woman who's in an abusive relationship, I think you're in an abusive relationship, and here's a pamphlet on ways to help, and when you're ready to leave, you can call me and I'll help you make a safety plan. What's that woman going to say? She's going to say, I'm not in an abusive relationship. Everything's fine. It was just one bad night, or he lost his job, or whatever excuses that they make. And so you haven't been able to intervene. But if you call your friend and you say, I'm going to a bonobo dance party or a bonobo self-defense class on Friday, and I'm going to pick you up at 6:30, and you get her into a different context where she can learn about that she has a self-worth defending and ways to actually enforce that, then you really have a way of intervening in this situation. And bonobo sisterhoods are really easy to create. I did one in Professor Romeo's class last year. In the last 2 years, I said, just take out your phone and open your WhatsApp and convene the 5 or 6 people around you, exchange numbers, and now you have a bonobo sisterhood. And if you're in trouble, you have 6 people that you can call, and they will come to your aid. It's just really, really simple. So I really urge you to take that message out.
Very clear. Paola, un microfono qua in prima fila, per favore.
Intanto grazie per la illuminante presentazione.
Let me thank you, first of all, for this enlightening presentation and for your remarks. I have a follow-up question. I clearly understand the model you talked about. I subscribe to it, and it's part of my DNA, and it's also part of any association such as ours, in that if you share the People's Project, automatically you adopt this model. But if we want to go from the notion of sisterhood to solidarity, I'm wondering what the top priorities to promote this model within our society and at the institutional level. What can we do to implement such a model also at an institutional level?
I think the two things to do are talk about bonobos and make them popular. So a young man walked me here, Tomasa, wherever he is, and he's studying communications and media. Talk about bonobos. Talk about bonobos on social media. Talk about bonobos. Think about bonobos. Make bonobos popular. Save bonobos. One of the slides that I showed was from the Friends of Bonobo site, and they're working to save bonobos because they're quite endangered in the Congo. So if you have money and you want to even make a small donation to Friends of Bonobos, that would be great. And the other thing is just to be bonobo, just to act on it in your own life and to really tune your ear so that you can hear the call. It's all over. It's an everyday undercurrent of our lives. So just be active and reactive.
Bene, se non ci sono altre domande abbiamo passato due bellissime...
Thank you. Unless there are questions, we just spent 2 wonderful hours. We understood 2 things. One, the evolution may drive our future. And second, that culture does make a difference. It falls upon us to change the world. There is nothing genetically determined that cannot be changed. We just need to know more, to try and find out how things are and act as community. So before we became a community, our brain just weighed half a kilo. Ever since we live in a community, we developed agriculture, we started living in tribes, and it's gone up to 1.5 kilos. So a kilo of your brain is dependent on social interaction. So if you don't want to lose that 1 kilo of brain, then engage with the others. And that's my take-home message. I would like to thank Diane, Graziella, and Rachele for everything they've told us and for then taking us into something we should be more cognizant of, because it's no longer acceptable to continue like that. Thank you.